awesome. We have a bunch of people in here. I'm sure more will continue to trickle in, but we can maybe just start just to honor everyone's time. We have an hour in here. And as I mentioned, we will be recording this. So thank you all for being here. And I'll just start off with a brief intro about myself. My name is Alexa. I'm the Director of Sales and Partnerships at Psychedelics Today. And yeah, really just passionate about health and wellness and obviously psychedelics, and excited to be here with JoQueta and Johanna. Yeah, totally up to you if you want to share your cameras. We are going to be recording this and posting it on YouTube. So if you're okay with having your video, that's totally up to you. We'll mostly be talking to you. And then at the end, we will have, opportunity for Q&A. And you can also message your questions in the chat. And if they kind of fit in with the conversation at the time, I can add them in as well. But yeah, I'm really excited to have Johanna and JoQueta here with me today. JoQueta, why don't you kick us off and give us an introduction about your background and your work? And yeah, really excited to have you sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really excited to be here. My name is, sorry, lost my voice. Dr. JoQueta Handy. My background is in natural integrative medicine. I attribute everything that I've learned about the gut-brain connection from my greatest teachers, which were autistic children. I worked with autistic children for over 30 years in area of cognition, education, always incorporating the gut and brain. My passion was working with the severe end of the spectrum, the nonverbal, aggressive, self-injurious, and helping them find their voice and be recognized for the brilliance that they have, mostly, especially in the classroom. I wrote curriculum, I built 5 schools for them. And about 6 years ago, I'd always used a technology called quantum biofeedback in assessing kind of the bioterrain, and moved fully into just working in that area. I've been in the New York hospitals. I've been in the LA schools, and my husband is a chiropractor. And so we've always practiced together. But about 6 years ago, we went in fully into practice together. So I took much more of just the role of natural integrative medicine. But again, applying everything that population taught me about the gut and the brain and that connection.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and Johanna is on the Psychedelics Today team as well. Why don't you share a bit more about your work with us and why you're excited about this topic too?
Yeah, thank you, Alexa, and thank you for your beautiful work, JoQueta. It's just like autistic populations are really dear to my heart, and it's just a growing trajectory in the world globally that we have more and more people with autism. So it's really important that we find ways to be with these populations and help them and integrate them into society. And I just was kind of reminded of this thing that somebody who has an autistic child said to me. They said that, I think maybe the reason for why there is so much autism in the world is so that we can all learn to be more compassionate towards one another, because no autistic individual is the same. So, but anyway, so the introduction. So my name is Johanna Hilla. I'm the coordinator of education and training, and I primarily work with Vital, which is our 12-month training program, and please do check it out. It's a great program. We've been running it for 2 years now, and we're launching our 3rd cohort on 23rd of January. And in all frankness, my part-time PhD has been left a little bit on the sides. But when Alexa told me that she was going to be doing something on the microbiome, I was like, well, I would love to be involved, because this is the subject of my PhD research, which I've been doing part-time for 2 years. So the intersection between the gut and the mind. And I have been working on it from the perspective of philosophy of science. So more looking at the sort of questions that arise as we find out more about bacteria and how it influences us and how it forms our society. So as you will hopefully learn, many new things during this conversation, but we have, according to quite a lot of estimates, more bacteria than human cells on our bodies. And that poses quite some intriguing questions about our human individuality and what we even consider our humanness to be. So these were some of the questions that I was focusing on in my very preliminary early research. And the way in which I got interested in the gut was also more so as I was, prior to starting to work with Psychedelics Today, for some time I did care work during the pandemic, and this was in Scotland, and I just couldn't help but notice how poor most people's diets were, and UK is pretty bad for this. US is in some parts, I'm sure, even worse. And the correlation between the sort of digestive issues and mental vulnerabilities it started to seem really evident for me. And I also worked with some elderly people, and the same correlation: dementia, digestive issues, the gut issues, they really seemed like stood out for me. And that was when I really started to read more into it, and it was this whole wellspring of knowledge really that I had no idea about beforehand. And I was that's what led to the PhD then.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so fascinating. For me, realizing like how little I really know about my body and specifically my gut. And, I've heard it's like so important to kind of keep your gut in balance and, manage your microbiome, but I really don't know, much about that. So I was hoping we could kind of start, high level, like, how do the brain and the gut connect? And like, kind of a bit more about the microbiome, like why is it so important? JoQueta, did you want to start us off?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, when I was referencing autism, so many people say, "Oh, I don't have autism," or they'll immediately say, "Oh, I know somebody who has autism." So when I was referencing that, autistic children are just here to be our teachers. They were the very first that showed us that gluten isn't good for us. And now we have whole restaurants that are set up around that. When I first started working with it in the late 90s, I actually had a neurologist that told me, a pediatric neurologist, that if I continued going down this route of telling parents, that gluten and casein-free diets were okay, that she would report me to the board, and she would have social services contact the parents for it being child abuse. So I am so happy that we have come as far as we have in a knowledge about the microbiome. So it's part of the small intestine, and it is our immune system. I believe that's what autistic children were the first to show us. And it is our second brain. So one of the main, there's several ways that the gut and the brain are tied together. 95% of serotonin is made in the gut, even though it is a brain hormone, a neurotransmitter. Only 5% is made in the brain. Another way that the two are tied together is through the vagus nerve. So the vagus is our 10th cranial nerve. It's our largest cranial nerve. And it helps, it's one of the major regulators of the sympathetic, parasympathetic, the autonomic nervous system. So our fight or flight. And it goes to 5 organs in the gut. The intestine, the stomach, the pancreas, the liver. And so many times, like when you may say, if I am stressed, I lose my appetite, I get nauseous, my sugar is dysregulated, I have pain. All of those reasons can go back to a link in our fight or flight system and that vagus nerve. And then as we eat things that maybe don't agree with us, I believe here in the US, we have messed up our food in an extremely horrible way. Food should be our best medicine. That was the way it was created for us. And it no longer is. And so then when we have food sensitivities or food allergies, that is many times linked back to that microbiome. The body seeing it as a foreign object. Maybe it might be leaky gut, which are just little micro perforations in that tissue. And then that causing a histamine reaction. The body begins to swell. That autonomic nervous system is triggered, and swelling begins. And then that leads to changes within maybe behavior. I'm agitated. I can't sleep. Insomnia, huge link back to sensitivities in the microbiome. Maybe the immune system just gets suppressed because of the chronic inflammatory response that's going on. So your wall of protection goes down and your vulnerability goes up. And it's easier for you to take on bacteria and fungus and viruses, heavy metals, parasites, all of those things. So it really creates a cascade effect. And in that connection, we've learned in autism that it begins in the gut. It is 100% gut, even though we tend to look at the behavior so much. And I think, again, they're just here to be our teachers. This is so true for many of us. When we look at, as we're going to get into in this discussion of depression, anxiety, where that so many times that chemical imbalance comes from issues in the microbiome, many times linked back to our food and sensitivities within. I'm blaming food on everything. It can also be the environment within our diet and within the environment, the things that we're exposed to on a daily basis.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really powerful. It's interesting, like the vagus nerve, that's really fascinating to me, like that connection, just because I'm a performer and have like dealt with stage fright. And so I totally like that really like I've like gotten sick like before performing because I'm so nervous. And that's so interesting. Like it really is linked to the stomach and the body. So that's fascinating. But I never really thought of like why that would be. Yeah, that's really fascinating. Johanna, do you have anything to add on this specific topic about the microbiome?
Yeah, I mean, maybe honestly, JoQueta, I don't really have much to add, but just sort of maybe for those of you who are not familiar with this field, most research regarding the gut microbiome has really just come out during the past 10 to 20 years, and the field itself is relatively new, and it's kind of become a little bit more mainstream now, but it's just like it's very recent information that we are just starting to understand. And there's something also called the hygiene hypothesis, which in the 90s it was essentially suggested that this sort of contemporary lifestyle, including the diet and the isolation, the sort of lack of understanding of the importance of nature and the exposure of children to dirt and animals and all this kind of thing, is also something that contributes to us becoming unwell. And maybe another thing that you didn't mention, JoQueta, is that there's clearly this trend where obviously correlation doesn't imply causation, but we're living through a mental health epidemic as well as a global obesity and inflammatory bowel disease and inflammatory disease problem as a general. And these are underlying causes to most health problems today. So yeah, it's kind of the trajectory is pretty clear.
I think that goes back to one of my favorite research projects. It's really old. This shows how old I am, but it's Potterford's cats. And what he showed was he fed a group of cats processed foods. And then he was monitoring the 3 generations. And so the disease states that the cats developed, which would be equivalent to us in our 70s, the next generation developed in their 30s. And the following generation were born with those same disease states. And I think that, again, that it's such a monumental study, even though it's like over 50 years old. That's what we're seeing right now. And I was just speaking I was at a birthday party last weekend and was speaking to a pediatric nurse who deals in pre and post-op. And I was just blown away when she said the number one procedure that she deals with on a daily basis in outpatient surgery is endoscopies, and that the average age is below 3. And I was just like, I can't believe that our children, our babies, are this sick, that this is the number one. I mean, when I was in the hospital, I never had a child doing an endoscopy that was below the age of 3. I don't even remember one. I think that was maybe I'm just not remembering, but like a teenager is what I want to say was probably the youngest child that I was dealing with that was in the mid 90s. And so when she was saying, yeah, that's our number one procedure right now, and she was like, it's not uncommon to have 5 a day that are 3 and below. And it just, that hurt my heart. So I really think, we are seeing this study becoming true. We're seeing children come into this world with disease states related back to the integrity of our gut. And yes, Johanna, exactly what you were saying, exposure within the environment, our food, so many variables that are influencing that.
Yeah, it leads to, where I wanted to go when talking about diet. And it's interesting, how can we counterbalance like our environment and the foods that we're kind of given? And even if we're inheriting stuff, from our parents and our womb, like what can we do now? Or maybe just kind of how can diet really impact our gut? And I think what's also interesting to talk about, obviously we all are here because we're either working or interested in psychedelics, and where do they come in? And I think we were talking about this like last week, how indigenous cultures will like encourage dieta before psychedelic experiences. And so it's like, okay, well, there's something there. Like, where is that wisdom coming from? What are they preparing our bodies for that, a lot of times now, and it's kind of maybe one of the challenges with this trendiness of psychedelic therapy and this going mainstream is people might not even be aware, or even just like recreational use, of the importance of dieta and how, can that be linked to bad trips or other kind of not great outcomes. So yeah, I really just kind of want to dive into diet. Are there supplements that we can take, which I know there are, kind of understanding what can help and what can hurt. And yeah, we'll let you take it from here.
Johanna, do you want to go first, or?
Sure. Yeah, I think somebody says dieta is essentially the eating protocol that one does prior to participating in a traditional ayahuasca ceremony. So it's very limited, no salt, no meat. It also includes like celibacy, and sort of the point is to connect more with oneself. So it's very simplistic, just sort of rice and particular vegetables, for instance. Yeah, definitely, if one does it, their experience of the psychedelic is much, much stronger versus if one doesn't do it. So yeah, there were quite a lot of different kinds of pieces in this, in your question. And maybe I will just sort of take first sort of like what can we do and in our day-to-day life, and then we can dive into the psychedelics part. I mean, I think the first and foremost is sort of to start educating yourself about food and about what you eat, and eliminating mostly all processed foods if at all possible. Looking at what types of oils you're using, and generally the main rule is just to use things with as little ingredients as possible, and you'll get quite far with it. Another thing is exercise, because actually exercise boosts metabolism, and this also has an impact on our gut biome. So it is not just something that is determined by our food, but also our particular habits. And yeah, really just cultivating curiosity around it has been very, very helpful for me. And since I'm coming from the philosophy perspective, I mean, some of the questions that I have been just sitting with is more just that, okay, so we have like 2 to 3 kilograms of this bacteria on ourselves, but this bacteria doesn't just exist on our bodies, inside of our bodies, but it exists also everywhere on our bodies. And it's kind of trippy for people to think about it, and some people don't really like to think about their skin having all these like trillions of tiny crawling organisms all over. But this bacteria exists everywhere. It exists everywhere on the planet, in the deep oceans, in space, and on every plant and the tree and whatever is there. So it's like we have such a long history with these organisms, and only now we're realizing, oh, they have this massive impact on us. Like, we actually have to consider it. Like, we have aliveness everywhere outside of us and inside of us. We're not disconnected from nature, we're part of it. So it's just like everything that we do should be in that alignment. And I think choosing what you eat and doing it intentionally, getting the food from the right sources, these are all the sort of little steps that we can take in that process. So I wanted to start with that. JoQueta, over to you, and then maybe we can go to the psychedelic part in a bit.
Sure. I love what you said about, the bacteria and the microorganisms. One of the biggest things, if we're just looking at our food and looking at, how have we come to this place? How are we right here in the disease states that we have? And one of the biggest things that we can blame on the lack of enough bacteria and the microorganisms is glyphosate. And for anybody that doesn't know what glyphosate is, it's the best way to describe it is like Roundup Ready, the insecticide, but it's like times 10, times 100. So glyphosate was originally developed or was first introduced by Monsanto in around 1992. And he said that the Monsanto company said, oh, this is as safe as table salt. That was actually an advertisement that they came out with. Said that it was biodegradable. None of that was true. And thousands and thousands of tons have been poured on our ground and in our water. So our ground here in the United States is no longer, we can't find ground that's not toxic. I'm in Southern California. One of the universities, the University of San Diego, about 5 years ago, decided that they were going to do the first human glyphosate study. And so to meet the requirements of their IRB, they went around looking for clean land, and they couldn't find it. And so then they said, okay, we're going to bring in soil and just use it as a topsoil for the planting. Well, it went toxic very quickly. So the only way that they could maintain the regulations of their IRB was to use raised gardens, bring in soil from New Zealand, and then treat our water, because our water is also full of glyphosate. I live in Newport Beach, California, and I was so proud of myself that I planted this raised garden and, in our little backyard, and was just watering it with the hose. And all of a sudden I'm like, Well, I wonder what is, let me just go look at the water regulation, because it has to be publicly printed. 24,000 parts of glyphosate in the water in Newport Beach. Incredible. It was actually the second worst in the state. And, Newport Beach is considered an affluent area. And so I just, my little bubble of like, oh, look what I've done with my, organic garden. Well, that went out the door. And so one of my favorite researchers is Dr. Stephanie Seneff, and she's a biochemist at MIT. And she did a glyphosate study. And what's so neat about it is nobody funded it. She was interested in it and wanted to see what it was. And so she took the publicly printed amount of glyphosate every year that's dumped into the ground. And then she took 5 disease states: cancer, autism, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and heart disease. And she just put that into an algorithm and just let it run. And what she saw was a 1-to-1 parallel between the disease states and the use of glyphosate. They were just going up. And so she didn't really share anything about this research until in 2006, in the state of California, we hit epidemic stages of autism. And the first thing the state came back and said, and the government, parents are blaming vaccines on autism. And so clearly this shows that it's not the vaccine causing autism, because we took the mercury out of the vaccine in 2003. And Dr. Seneff kind of went, well, I think I may know what's going on here. And she said, look at the use of glyphosate and the rate of autism. And it wasn't just autism, it was all 5, but autism was leading the pack. And glyphosate directly destroys our bacteria in the microbiome. It destroys the organisms and the bacteria in the ground that plants need to grow, that grubs feed off of, that eat the plants, that feed the ground, is just kind of that cycle. So Monsanto came back and said in 2014, 10, somewhere in there, if we don't up our game, we're going to starve. We just won't be able to grow enough food, which absolutely wasn't true. And he showed this picture of this huge super weed and said, this is what's going to overtake farming. So glyphosate was even the intensity, the amount being used, that was increased. So we went from just soaking our seeds, that's genetically modified seeds, in glyphosate, to pouring it into the ground. So the effect on the bacteria, the microorganisms, were greatly affected. And then we take that on. And then if you go back to the study that I mentioned, Potterford's cats, how is that transferred throughout the generations? Well, there's a huge effect, as you can imagine. And so with our food, it's not just about the genetically modified food, it's also about, our organic food. And not saying that we shouldn't eat organic. The farmers are doing the very best that they can possibly do. And yes, we should support them 100%. But there really isn't organic food in the United States, just like what I was saying, just personally happened to me with my little small raised garden. Our water is toxic, our ground is toxic, our animals, our grains are toxic. And so as our animals are eating that, then our meat is toxic. And so it really becomes a war. Is the place that we're in, survival, and doing the very best that we can in choosing our food. But on top of that, around supplementation to create that barrier, that protection that's needed in the microbiome for our immune systems as we move forward. So it was probably a way longer explanation than what you
No, thank
wanted.
you. I mean, context is important, that, and it's terrifying, and it's also the reality that we're living in America. But yeah, I know we have a question, and that's where we're going next is how do psychedelic therapy, working with the gut, like based on everything you just said, are I know you work with guide, I believe you guide individuals, but you work in this field. How do you help prepare people for working with psychedelics, or have you seen people who maybe have an imbalanced gut working with psychedelics and not having success, and then you're able to work with their gut and then see more successful outcomes? Like, would love to hear how you use this, how this has kind of led into your work. And of course, Johanna, would love your opinion as well.
For sure. So I work with a lot of patients. Yes, I do guiding on journeys, but mainly work with microdosing. And not everybody is healthy enough to microdose. One of the first things that we always look at are medications that people are taking, and just making sure that there's no contraindications from that standpoint. For sure, big heart, if there's any heart issues and things like that. But I think many times, just like you were saying, Alexa, like the health of the gut gets overlooked. And just like you can have, when you have gut issues, that affects your absorption. Some of your greatest absorption occurs in the microbiome. And so if that is damaged, it isn't as viable as it should be. That can affect sensitivities. People can have reactions even when dealing with low dose, like in microdosing. They might develop a rash. They might develop like their insomnia increases instead of getting better. The biggest thing, they're like, this isn't doing anything. I'm not seeing a change at all. So I think it's so important to always individually look, but just in making sure, from a diet standpoint, if there's a lot of white sugar. And I had a patient the other day, I got a big lesson, a cancer patient that, I said, we got to take white sugar out of your diet. And he was so proud the next week that he came back to report that he had taken out white sugar and he was just using pure cane sugar. I'm like, okay, that's the same thing. So it was just a good lesson to me of, you need to be more specific and detailed when you say that. So, but white sugar is a major blocker when we're working with psychedelics. And I know you mentioned processed food, but 99% of the American diet is sugar. So we don't even think about like bread, dairy products, condiments, salad dressing, fruit juice, chips, crackers. So all of those things, really taking a look at how many sugar products you're consuming in a day. That's one of the questions that I ask all of my patients when I'm doing a quantum biofeedback assessment. How many white sugar products do you eat a day? And I'll get people to say, oh, I don't eat sugar. I'm like, yeah, you do. You live in the US, you do eat sugar. So that usually tells me, okay, there's a big awareness there that you're just not realizing the amount of sugar that's in your diet. And then for sure, processed foods, those we just don't want those. We do the best on home cooked foods. Well, Johanna mentioned oils. The FDA says that in the US that the oil only has to be 30% of what it's labeled. So if you're using an olive oil that looks like vegetable oil, it probably is. And so a lot of times the oils, like canola oil, is 30% Canadian motor oil. And so that's going to show up as a sensitivity. So we have to the bottom line is we have to get the inflammatory response down. That's occurring in the gut from the reaction to white sugars, bad oils, preservatives, additives. Look at the ingredients list. Supplementation is one of the worst places to get additives and preservatives. If you go to the other ingredients and there's more things in it than just the capsule, and maybe, they need to put some magnesium stearate or some other natural preservative in there. But if there are words that you can't pronounce and there's a lot of other chemicals in there, first of all, you're not getting your money's worth. And secondly, you're probably most people react more to what's in the food than the food itself. So just having that awareness can kind of change your shopping experience and the food that you're choosing. So I'll let Johanna go. I can keep talking forever about this. So
It's so interesting though, and I really appreciate it's just like your intricate understanding of the American diet, and obviously the situation is rather dire, as you were describing with glyphosate. But there is things that we can do, and that's always for the wellness of our mind and the body, and educating yourself is the first point. So just back to your original question around like what really is the connection between psychedelics and the gut biome. The answer is we don't know, because the research hasn't really looked into it yet. There's a bunch of different articles that are essentially saying really we should be looking at the gut brain axis and the impact of psychedelics on the gut. But there's probably some reasons, or the reasons for why this hasn't really been done so far is because the composition of the gut biome is extremely changing. There's a certain kind of baseline, but then you really change your composition on day-to-day basis, even by hourly basis, based on what you're exposed to and what you consume. So trying to really track the nuances of like how your gut changes as a result of certain kind of psychedelics requires quite developed machinery, which probably a lot of labs don't have. But I'm in connection with a couple of researchers who are planning to do it with DMT, so I look forward to seeing what comes of it. But the speculation, we can go to those. So essentially, we know that psychedelics treat things such as PTSD, depression, and other conditions which are also linked to gut dysbiosis. So there is a connection there. And there is also some research showing the potential of psychedelics to treat immune response. So essentially, they might have some kind of impact on our immunity. And this is obviously then again related to the gut. And also, when you really think about, certain psychedelics, especially ayahuasca, but also psilocybin, is that these sort of physical reactions such as vomiting and nausea are extremely common. And especially with ayahuasca, you really go through this very intensive purging process oftentimes, which definitely will have a massive impact on your gut and reset it in many ways. So there's not much research, but there are very promising indications. There are also a lot of anecdotal reports of people who have managed to successfully treat the behavioral symptoms of autism with psilocybin. There's also some studies done in Canada where autism has been successfully treated on mice with psilocybin. So this is really new, really cutting edge from the past couple of years. And we are just looking to find out more. But I really do think that these two fields are developing side by side, because they also, like I already mentioned a little bit before, they speak for our interconnectedness with nature, and our consciousness changes as a result of ingesting a certain kind of mushroom, and it's just like it also has a physiological impact on us. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on that connection.
I think James Fadiman was one of the first that spoke to this connection in his research. And he said, just like what Johanna said, we can't prove it. So far, we have not been able to prove the connection in using psychedelics and the gut, but we know that it does improve it. One of the things, whether it's been just anecdotal reports, but looking at addiction, consistently people have said with psilocybin, as in also reduction of alcohol cravings, they've also had a reduction in sugar cravings. So if we go back to our original example in autism of just being here to be our teachers, and we know that the gut and the brain are directly connected together, as we mentioned, if we're improving one, it's impossible not to improve the other, and vice versa. So we know without a doubt that psychedelics change the neural pathway firing for a positive aspect. And so that is absolutely, again, just in the way that we're wired, that's going to have a positive reflection in the gut. So I hope there's more research done on this area. If we look at functional mushrooms, I have 2 blends of my own, and when we use like reishi and cordyceps and lion's mane, lots of research backing that up in how that affects the immune system and the digestive system. We also know that mushrooms like each other. So when we stack them, whether you're stacking functional and psychedelic, or you're just stacking functional mushrooms, you're getting a broader spectrum of healing, of change. And so we certainly have the research in place with functional mushrooms and how those impact digestion and how well those stack with psychedelic mushrooms.
Thank you.
Just one thought with autism, I know those studies are coming out. Just the thing that I've seen personally, that psilocybin does not work well with on the severe end of autism. I'm not sure in the studies if they've qualified, the severity, where those individuals are on the spectrum. My hunch is, again, this is just me talking, it goes back and is related to, again, the microbiome and serotonin, because of the permanent damage in the microbiome and autism. They do not make enough serotonin. And so I think that that's why we see that psilocybin attaching to the AC2 receptor is the recovery piece. Autistic children just may not have the mechanisms on the severe end of the spectrum for the recovery that's needed. But again, that's just total speculation and on my side.
Yeah, I agree. And also just to clarify that the studies that I mentioned, they weren't clinical studies done in trials, because this getting the ethics solved for that one can be a little bit of a tricky one. But yeah, but my studies were successful. That's done by a company called Nova Mentis. And then the ones that I was referring to were more just essentially some self-reports from people who had mild autism, who had basically managed to somehow, in their own view, improve their autistic symptoms. So yeah, we're still looking to see what the actual clinical research will look like on that one.
Cool. We got a question that I think is really interesting from Gwen. And you just actually went there, but I'm wondering if there's more. Can you speak to the ways in which serotonin is processed in the gut? Because yeah, I agree. I think that seems like a really big connection in terms of psychedelics, and specifically MDMA and psilocybin, where serotonin is being increased in who's ever using it. So curious if there's more either from either of you, like research or information on exactly how the gut, and the brain together are working. You said the serotonin is created in the gut. So if, when you're taking psychedelics, if you could just elaborate more on kind of that connection, I think that would be helpful.
Donna, do you want to go first?
No, please, I think it's better if you go ahead first in this one, and I'll fill in whatever I can.
Okay. So again, I think just to maybe to clarify the question. So is the question around the synthesis of serotonin, or is it in relation to serotonin and psychedelics? I just want to make sure I answer it accurately.
Gwen, you can chime in. It's going to be like a collaborative conversation. Thank you. Yeah, I think speaking to the parallel around the gut processes serotonin, right? You spoke earlier about ways in which this this causes disease and different physiological conditions, where that also leads to psychological issues because of that chemical imbalance. And if our gut is the part of our body that processes that can lead to imbalances, it makes sense that that is also going to be affected when we're adding substances that increase that chemical. So not only creating an environment in our gut that's more conducive to absorption of serotonin by being more informed about gut health, but maybe part of understanding gut health, part of supporting gut health is understanding what can I do or not do to be in support of gut balance when it comes to serotonin, because a lot of times we also can unknowingly run risk of serotonin syndrome, where we already have high levels of serotonin in the body, and now we're doubling down with certain psychedelics that again increase that serotonin level. And so if our balance there in the gut is not primed, it can exacerbate actually issues that we may be going to psychedelics to improve in the first place. So that's my thought process in framing the question of what are some ways that we can promote balance of serotonin in the gut.
Such a great question. And I think, thank you for bringing it up, because it's one of the biggest, what's a way to say this? I think it's one of the most important things that should be being discussed. And it's not talked about a lot. At least I haven't heard it. And that's recovery. I mean, I think if I'm understanding correctly, that's what you're saying. How do we recover, like on a microdosing schedule, for instance, if we're using James Fadiman's approach, which says 1 day on, 2 days off, or if we're using Paul Stamets, 4 days on, 3 days off. What are we doing on those off days? And those off days are labeled as our recovery days, right? But if we're already saying that we're at a deficit, then what are we specifically doing to recover? And so important. And so one of the things, that was why I developed the specific blends that I did, was just because of my own caseload in wanting to help with recovery. Almost everybody that I see in my office, whether they have a diagnosis or they're just coming into, I just want better health. I just want to know what I should be eating. I want better digestion. It goes back to the issue in the microbiome. And so some of the things that I found that had been researched that help with recovery, it is just like I was mentioning: lion's mane, cordyceps, reishi, ashwagandha, astragalus. What am I leaving off? Rhodiola. Using a little bit of niacin or black pepper in that mix just to help with absorption. But in taking those and stacking those, in taking those on a daily basis, we're not only helping with, I left off maca. Maca is a big one for helping with the serotonin synthesis. So in all of those, we're not giving like tryptophan or actually giving serotonin, but we're using agonists that work with the body in helping the uptake mechanism. So we want something that's strengthening. One of the biggest things that we learned from autism is it's not about taking things away. So initially in autism, what we did was, like gluten-free, casein-free diets, taking things out. And what we saw was, yes, the inflammatory response went down, but it didn't fix it. So what was the key? The key was to going in and healing the tissue, supporting those little micro perforations, and some herbs that are wonderful in doing that are like marshmallow, burdock, licorice. I use a blend a lot in my practice. It has about 10 different herbs around just healing the tissue, reestablishing in your small intestine. You have little villi that move like this. I call them shag carpet. And it just helps to move things through that small intestine. And when those villi get damaged, instead of standing up like this, they're laying down. And so we have to reestablish that environment. And herbs are wonderful at doing that. Again, functional mushrooms, ashwagandha, which is a GABA agonist, is also very important in the mix. And so I think making sure that that is part of your dieta, that diet, that plan in helping to recover. So like with microdosing, I have my patients take those stacks with psilocybin, or if they're microdosing LSD, same thing, and then take those on their recovery days. And at the same time, we may look at specific things like, do we need some of those other herbs that I mentioned? Do we need digestive enzymes? Do we need to look at stomach acid, the HCl? And balancing that for better absorption. But just as kind of a global across the board, I think that those are really good go-tos for everyone. Was that helpful? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think I mean, I'm even seeing in the chat some interest on learning more about what that beautiful list that you shared consists of. And I think it's important also to possibly clarify and expand your use of the word recovery too, right? Like this is integration, ultimately, integration of a psychedelic experience on any level, and also preparation. And that was kind of more so where I was coming from in terms of preparing the body and mind, right? And that speaks to what Alexa brought up in the dieta from indigenous traditional respectful offerings of the dieta, where you're also kind of creating a connection with the medicine by preparing the body and the mind in that way. And Johanna, you spoke to that as well, where it's not just what you're consuming in terms of food, but your relationship with your body, what you're consuming visually, the news, right? Like all of that, I think, speaks to the preparation and what you're naming as recovery, what I know as integration in between these experiences. So really helpful to hear your thoughts on ways that you can make that gut environment more conducive to that experience. Thank you. Yeah, I was curious if you also find, JoQueta, that you will advise people to use the supplements prior to, microdosing or any experience. Like if you're trying to, prepare, like that was kind of my question too, was can this be used pre, like do you typically kind of have dietary intakes before you'll even, work with someone with the psychedelics?
Absolutely. Again, yeah, great point. as I said, I use a system called quantum biofeedback. So I won't give someone or work with them in microdosing or any psychedelic experience until I look at, assess that whole bioterrain. And so that is, we're looking at body, mind, and I think spirit is hugely important too. You know, when they're in my office, we're focusing on body and mind as the first step, and then we introduce spirit in the next piece. But I believe that's so important for overall healing. And that's what I tell everybody. Not everybody is healthy enough to microdose. And so let's, using this, it's a scan of the whole body. Let's look at the whole body first. And let's see, let's look at your diet. So in an assessment, we're going over all of that. What is your diet? What are your, what supplements are you taking? Then based on the scan, where are we seeing deficits? And then looking at it, as you mentioned, in integration, I feel that's so much coming in with the spiritual piece and looking and the emotional piece, and we talk about what is your intention here? What are you wanting to get out of this? And I'm on the psychological part, I work a lot with like no bad parts, that Dick Swartz work. We use parts work, we use low dose DMT, 5-MeO in doing specific programs just around the emotional piece. So I think there are so many components that go into it. I don't think it's one size fits all in any way. But just as some general guidelines in what are consistencies that I see in my practice, what I mentioned would be where I would go to. But yes, everybody is an individual and we need to work on it in that way.
Thank you. Johanna, do you have anything to add?
Honestly, no, I'm just really enjoying absorbing your wisdom, JoQueta. Thank you so much. It's just a real treat for me to, be in dialogue with somebody who already has been in the field for a while and actually combining your understanding of the gut with psychedelics, because I think it's really so fundamental. And yeah, I think the one piece that I thought to maybe just to add to what you were saying already, JoQueta, that also keeping an eye out for your glucose levels and understanding like how you have certain kind of spikes and how eating foods in certain orders or at certain times of the day. So for instance, if you do want to have a dessert, it's better to have it after something savory, like a proper meal, and that will spike your glucose less. And glucose is essentially, as far as I understood, JoQueta, you probably would have a much more eloquent explanation for this, but what makes us age faster. And this is like one tool as well to use to regulate your serotonin. So that was the only bit that I wanted to add to that question.
Thanks. Yeah, we have one comment question in like chats that maybe JoQueta you could address. I know we have like a minute left. Annie said she's in the process of working with a naturopath to heal her gut. GI map test revealed many imbalances. So she's on a very intensive GI specific antibiotic and intensive probiotic, which she believes will truly help with neurotransmitter production as well. I don't know if you have any insights or, would your supplements potentially be beneficial on top of that, or kind of wait and see how this goes? Curious if you have any thoughts.
It's interesting doing an antibiotic and a probiotic at the same time. I'm not familiar with that treatment process. Usually it's one and then introduce the next one. I'd love to, if she wants to, if you want to reach out to me individually, I'd be more than happy to speak to you about this. It's called Xanax. Yeah. I think there might be a few more pieces that just
I'm sure.
need to be filled in there, so I'm not giving misinformation. For sure, with with brilliant blends, you can use those. It's going to support the gut. It will not interfere in any way with what you're doing. But I'd be happy to specifically where, you're talking about the neurotransmitter production. I'd be more than happy to speak with you and get more information about it, just so that I can guide you accurately.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. And as mentioned, so we're at time, but thank you everyone for being here. Yeah, I learned a lot. It's very fascinating. I'm really excited to start taking the supplements myself. I think fortunately we've all dealt with gut stuff. But yeah, if you want to learn more, mybrilliantblends.com is a great place to learn more about JoQueta's work and her different blends. And feel free to reach out to us, to her, if you have any further questions or want to learn more. Anything else that you want to share about how to find you?
That website is great. You can email me directly at jhandy@mybrilliantblends.com. And yeah, I'll be happy to help in any way.
Great, thank you. Johanna, want to share a brief plug about what you're working on?
Well, it won't be brief. So
Fair enough. Check out Vital
um,
Psychedelic Training.
yes, Vital Psychedelic Training is what I'm working on. So please all go check that out. And regarding this PhD project, you will hear about it in some years, I imagine. Oh, actually, but I do want to put in the chat two things. So one of them is this presentation that I did about my PhD so far 1 year ago, very preliminary, but anybody who might be interested, it's there. And then also a recommendation of a book which really taps into the sort of like connection of indigenous cultures to their bacterial knowledge. It's called Microbes as Shamans, and it's by this author called Geraldo Herrera. So check those things out, and it was such a lovely thing to have this dialogue with you, JoQueta, and thanks for hosting, Alexa. And yeah, hope for more of these kinds of discussions.
Thank you so much. It was a
Yes, thank you
pleasure.
all. Bye.